The First Brothers, a sleep story of Cain and Abel. Let the day's tensions leave your body now, flowing out through your fingertips like water finding its way to the sea. Tonight we venture into one of humanity's oldest and most painful stories. The tale of the first brothers, the first rivalry, the first violence that shattered the morning of the world. Yet even in this darkness, we will find light, for no story of human failing is without its deeper truths about love, choice, and the mercy that pursues us even in our worst moments. Breathe slowly. Let your heart grow quiet. Some stories must be told gently, like tending a wound, and this is one of them. Trust that even the hardest truths can bring healing when received with a peaceful spirit. Outside the Garden of Eden, where thorns now grew alongside wheat and sweat mingled with tears upon the ground, Adam and Eve learned what it meant to be human in a fallen world. The earth that had once yielded its bounty freely now required coaxing and toil. Their hands, which had once known only the soft stems of flowers and the smooth bark of fruit trees, grew rough with work. Their backs ached from bending to the soil. Their hearts carried the weight of what they had lost. But in the midst of this new hardship came something that had never existed before: the miracle of new life stirring within Eve's womb. She felt the child growing within her like a secret promise, a whisper that life would continue despite everything, that love could still create beauty even in exile. When her time came, Eve labored as women have labored ever since, bringing forth life through pain, pain that was both curse and blessing, the cost and the gift of continuation. And when she held her firstborn son in her arms, seeing his tiny fingers curl around hers, feeling his breath warm against her cheek, she named him Cain, saying, "I have acquired a man from the Lord." Cain, the first child ever born, the first to draw breath in a world marked by mortality, the first to open his eyes on skies that had witnessed both paradise and exile. He was beautiful in the way all babies are beautiful, perfect in his miniature humanity, carrying within himself infinite possibility and his parents' desperate hopes for redemption. Time passed, months that turned to seasons, seasons that became years. Cain grew strong and curious, learning to walk on legs that would carry him far from innocence. He learned to speak words that would one day wound as deeply as they could heal. He learned to work with his hands, to plant seeds and tend the growing things, following in his father's footsteps as Adam taught him the patient art of coaxing life from reluctant soil. Then came another birth, another labor, another son. Eve held this second child and named him Abel, which means breath or vapor. Perhaps because she had learned by then how fragile life could be, how quickly breath could be taken away. Or perhaps she sensed something in this gentle child, something ethereal and temporary, like morning mist that graces the earth briefly before the sun calls it home. The two boys grew up side by side in that world between Eden and everything else. They played in fields where their parents told them flowers had once grown without planting. They slept under stars that had watched over paradise, though they themselves had never known such perfect peace. They were brothers in the truest sense, born of the same womb, raised by the same hands, breathing the same air thick with the memory of what humanity had lost. But as boys become men, differences emerge like rivers branching from a single source. Cain was drawn to the earth, to the mystery of seed and soil, to the long patience required to turn wilderness into farmland. He had strong hands for the plow, and a keen eye for the subtle signs that indicated when to plant and when to harvest. Under his care, vegetables grew in neat rows, grain swayed golden in the wind, and orchards bore fruit that was sweet, if not quite as sweet as Eden's had been. He was in many ways the image of his father Adam, a keeper of the ground, a wrestler with thorns, a man who understood that bread comes only through the sweat of the brow. Abel was different. Where Cain saw potential crops, Abel saw grazing land. Where Cain planned furrows, Abel envisioned flocks. He was drawn to the animals, the sheep with their trusting eyes, the goats with their playful antics, the cattle with their patient strength. Under his gentle care, the flocks multiplied and prospered. He knew each animal by name, could sense their needs before they expressed them, could find the best pastures even in seasons of drought. He moved through the world more lightly than his brother, less bound to place, following his sheep to wherever the grass grew greenest. Their parents watched their sons with a mixture of pride and something deeper, a recognition that in these two boys they were seeing humanity begin to differentiate itself, to explore the many ways of being human. Adam understood Cain's connection to the soil, having felt that same pull himself. Eve saw something of her own nurturing nature in Abel's care for his flocks. Both sons were good, both were necessary, both were beloved. But love, even the purest love, cannot always prevent the shadows that fall across the human heart. It began subtly, as most tragedies do. Cain noticed that when storms came, Abel's sheep could be moved to shelter quickly, while his crops might be damaged by hail or flood. He observed that Abel's work seemed to flow more naturally, while his own required constant vigilance against weeds and pests and failing rains. When visitors came, but there were others now, other children of Adam and Eve, they seemed to gather more readily around Abel, drawn by his easy laughter and gentle ways, while Cain's more serious nature often left him standing at the edges of conversations. These were small things, barely worth noticing. But in the human heart, small things can grow into large ones, like seeds that sprout in darkness. The time came when both brothers felt moved to make an offering to the Lord, not because they were commanded to, but because gratitude and worship were stirring in their hearts. They had heard their parents speak of walking with God in the cool of evening, of a relationship that had been intimate and immediate. Though they themselves had never experienced such closeness, they longed for it, and offering seemed a way to reach toward the divine. Cain brought an offering from the fruit of the ground, the work of his hands, the best of what he had grown. Perhaps it was grain, golden and full, representing months of labor under the sun. Perhaps it was fruit, sweet and perfectly ripe, chosen from his finest trees. Whatever it was, it came from his sweat and his skill, his patience and his provision. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions, the best of what he had, the animals he had raised from birth, whose lives he had protected and whose trust he had earned. It was a costlier offering in some ways, for it meant the death of creatures he had loved, the pouring out of life itself upon the altar. They built their altars side by side, these first brothers, and laid their offerings upon them. They called upon the name of the Lord, each in his own way, with his own words from his own heart. And the Lord looked upon Abel and his offering with favor. How do we know this? Perhaps fire came down from heaven to consume Abel's sacrifice. Perhaps a sense of peace and acceptance settled upon him like a blessing. Perhaps he simply knew in the deep place where the soul meets the divine, that his gift had been received with pleasure. But upon Cain and his offering, the Lord did not look with favor. The text does not tell us why. Generations of scholars and sages have wondered at this mystery. Was it something in the heart behind the gift? Was it the nature of the sacrifice itself? Blood versus grain, life poured out versus life preserved? Was it simply the sovereign choice of God, who sees what we cannot see and knows what we cannot know? What we do know is this: Cain was very angry and his countenance fell. Imagine it. The first experience of divine rejection, the first taste of cosmic unfairness, the first moment when a human being felt passed over by the very God who had breathed life into his father's lungs. The anger that rose in Cain was not just personal disappointment, but something deeper, a rage at the apparent arbitrariness of divine favor, a fury at being found wanting when he had given his best. But even in this moment of anger, mercy reached toward him. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. Its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." Here was the first divine intervention in human anger. The first attempt to call someone back from the brink of choices that could not be undone. God's words carried both warning and hope. Sin was indeed crouching like a predator at the door of Cain's heart, but it was not inevitable. He could still choose. He could still master the darkness that sought to master him. But choice, that terrible and beautiful gift given to humanity in the beginning, cuts both ways. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. The text does not record what he said, leaving us to imagine the conversation. Did he try to explain his anger? Did he blame Abel for being favored? Did he suggest they go somewhere private to talk? Or did his words carry a darker invitation, heavy with the weight of what was already forming in his heart? Whatever he said, Abel went with him. Perhaps Abel, innocent and trusting, had no idea of the storm raging in his brother's soul. Perhaps he hoped to comfort Cain, to bridge whatever gap had opened between them. Perhaps he simply loved his brother and wanted to help. They were in the field when it happened. That place where Abel had so often led his sheep to graze, where Cain had so often worked his crops, where both had played as children under their parents' watchful eyes. The same sun that had shone on their boyhood games now looked down on something that had never existed before in all the world's brief history. Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. The first murder, the first violence between humans. The first time one person chose to end another's life, not for food or protection, but from the darkness that had been crouching at his door, waiting for invitation. How did it happen? The text is mercifully silent on the details, sparing us the graphic reality of humanity's first descent into violence. Perhaps it was with a stone, picked up in sudden rage. Perhaps with a tool, turned from its peaceful purpose to this terrible use. Perhaps with bare hands, strength meant for building used instead for destroying. But however it happened, when it was over, Abel lay still in the field where he had so often walked. His breath, that fragile vapor for which he was named, returned to the God who had given it. The first human death had come not from age or accident or disease, but from the deliberate choice of one brother to destroy another. And Cain stood over his brother's body, feeling perhaps for the first time the full weight of what choice could mean, the terrible power that had been placed in human hands to create or destroy, to love or to murder. The silence that followed must have been deafening. No wind stirred the grain, no bird sang. Even the sheep, somewhere in the distance, seemed to sense that something fundamental had changed in the world. Death had come to stay. Then, cutting through the silence, came a voice that Cain knew, though he had never heard it speak directly to him before. "Where is Abel, your brother?" It was the same God who had once asked Adam, "Where are you?" when he hid in the garden after eating the forbidden fruit. Not a question born of ignorance, for God knew where Adam was hiding, just as he knew what had become of Abel, but a question that created space for confession, for acknowledgement, for the beginning of whatever healing might still be possible. But Cain's answer revealed how far he had fallen from the innocence of Eden. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The first lie told to God. The first deflection of responsibility. The first time a human being not only refused to acknowledge wrongdoing, but questioned the very bonds that connect us to one another. Am I my brother's keeper? The question hung in the air like smoke from a ruined city, poisoning everything it touched with its implied denial of human connection, human responsibility, human love. But God's response came swift and sorrowful. "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Even in death, Abel spoke. Even silenced, he testified. The earth itself, which had received the first drops of innocent blood ever spilled in anger, became a witness to the crime. The ground that Cain had worked so faithfully, that had yielded its fruits to his labor, now held something it was never meant to hold. The life of the righteous, poured out before its time. Then came the judgment, and it was terrible in its precision. "And now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond, you shall be on the earth." The punishment fit the crime with heartbreaking exactness. Cain, who had been bound to the soil, who had found his identity in making things grow, would now be cut off from that relationship. The earth that had been his partner would become his adversary. The stability he had known would give way to endless wandering. The man who had killed his brother would now live as one who belonged nowhere, welcomed nowhere, at home nowhere. But even then, even in the midst of pronouncing judgment, mercy flickered through the darkness. Cain's response revealed that some recognition of the magnitude of what he had done was finally breaking through. "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me." Here at last was honest acknowledgement of consequences, real fear of what his actions had unleashed, genuine terror at the prospect of facing a world that would judge him as he had judged his brother. He had introduced violence into the world. Now he feared that violence would pursue him in return. But the Lord said to him, "Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him. Even for the first murderer there was protection. Even for the one who had shown no mercy, mercy was shown. The mark of Cain, whatever form it took, was not primarily a brand of shame, but a sign of divine protection, ensuring that the cycle of violence would not continue, that revenge would not become the law of the world. So Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden, the land of wandering, the place of exile from exile. He carried with him the weight of what he had done, the memory of his brother's face, the knowledge that he had forever changed not just his own life, but the very nature of human existence. But the story does not end with Cain's banishment, for even in judgment, life finds a way to continue. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. He built a city and called the name of the city after his son. Life went on. Families grew. Civilization began to emerge from the ashes of innocence. The man who had been condemned to wander became a builder of cities. The one cursed from the ground became a founder of settlements. Through Cain's line came musicians and metalworkers, those who played the harp and flute, those who forged instruments of bronze and iron. Even from the seed of violence came contributions to human culture, beauty and utility emerging from the most unlikely source. And what of Abel? His blood spoke from the ground, but his voice continued in other ways. The text tells us that Adam knew Eve again, and she bore another son and named him Seth, saying, "For God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed." Through Seth's line would come the generations that called upon the name of the Lord, the line that would eventually to Noah, to Abraham, to all the promises yet to be fulfilled. Abel's life, though brief, became a testament to faith, to righteousness, to the possibility of offering acceptable worship even in a fallen world. Centuries later, he would be remembered as the first martyr, the first to die for righteousness' sake, the first whose blood testified to truths that transcended death. The field where he died became, in a sense, the first church, the place where innocent blood was spilled, where sacrifice took on new meaning, where death itself began to point towards something greater than itself. Every altar built afterward, every offering made in faith, every prayer lifted by those who sought to walk with God would echo back to that moment when Abel's gift was accepted and his life was poured out. But perhaps the deepest truth of this ancient story lies not in its violence, but in its questions. Am I my brother's keeper? The question Cain asked in defiance has echoed through every generation since, challenging each of us to answer not with words but with lives. Yes, we are our brother's keepers. Yes, we are responsible for one another. Yes, the bonds that connect us are stronger than the angers that divide us. The story of Cain and Abel is ultimately not about why bad things happen to good people, or why some offerings are accepted and others rejected. It is about the choices we make when life doesn't turn out as we expected, when we feel overlooked or unfairly treated, when the darkness crouches at our door and whispers that violence is the answer. As this difficult story settles into the quiet of evening, let it remind you of the power you carry in your own hands. The power to build up or tear down, to heal or to harm, to be your brother's keeper or your brother's destroyer. The same choice that faced Cain faces you each day in smaller ways. When someone else receives the recognition you wanted, when others seem blessed while you feel passed over, when anger rises and whispers that someone else is to blame for your pain. But you are not Cain, and this is not that field. You can choose differently. You can master the darkness that crouches at your door. You can be the keeper of your brothers and sisters, the protector of those who are vulnerable, the one who breaks cycles of violence instead of continuing them. Rest now in the knowledge that even in humanity's darkest moments, mercy pursues us. Even when we fail most completely, grace makes a way forward. The mark of Cain was a sign of protection, not condemnation, proof that love finds a way even for those who seem beyond redemption. Sleep peacefully, knowing that your choices matter, that your life has purpose, that the blood of the innocent still cries out for justice, but also points toward hope. Tomorrow you will have new opportunities to choose love over anger, mercy over revenge, connection over isolation. You are your brother's keeper. You are your sister's protector. You are loved beyond measure, even in your failures. Dream of fields where brothers walk together in peace. The end of the beginning continues.